Didn't see what he was yelling at. I didn't see the ambulance coming, but I remembered him yelling. That was the last thing I heard from him.
Jesus came to me and told me that I have to go back to earth and be a good Christian and tell others about him.
Quite incredible was the journey beyond death by Landon Whitley, who said that he died 3 times, went to the afterlife, and came back with a terrifying message from Jesus. What does she look like? Like Cassie, but a little smaller, and with hair like yours in heaven, this little girl came up to me and would not stop hugging me. More than a spiritual insight, this fleeting moment was a warning that would change his life forever. The terrifying encounter Whitley had with Jesus gave him profound insights into the afterlife. What was the ominous revelation he received, and how did he cheat death? What if you could see the afterlife, not once, but 3 times, and return with a chilling message from Jesus himself? Landon Whitley's near-death journey defies belief, offering both hope and a haunting warning. Before we dive into this incredible revelation, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what lies beyond. The boy who died 3 times and saw Jesus. Extraordinary events unraveled for Landon Whitley, an 8-year-old boy whose experiences challenged conventional wisdom about existence, mortality, and the unknown realms beyond. His astonishing journey began on a fateful Sunday morning in 1997, beginning like any other day, but which would result in heartbreak, miracles, and an unforgettable encounter with the afterlife. Landon, his mother Julie, and his father Andy were on their way home from church in their Pontiac without warning of the tragedy to unfold. Julie remembers well what happened right before it occurred. Suddenly Andy said something, though nobody knew what he had said because nobody heard his words. In that one instant, their lives came crumbling down. A speeding ambulance ran a light at an intersection and broadsided the family car, sending them into a crushing accident. The impact was such that Landon's parents were seriously injured, and Andy died due to the injury. But where was young Landon? Was he safe? Wait for the twist in this story. Julie was thrown into deep despair, trying to come to terms with the loss of her husband. She remembered that she did not see Andy's last scream, nor the arriving ambulance, but she could never forget the last thing he said, as it was the last thing she heard from him. The condition was worse in the case of young Landon. The rescuers found it difficult to locate him in the debris, and when they finally found him, he was unconscious. They tried hard to bring him back to life, but his case was critical. Airlifted to a nearby hospital, Landon's life was precariously balanced on that fateful day. Far from over, that day was his battle for survival. He died twice, once on the scene at the time of the accident and during transport to the hospital. One Sunday morning in 1997, Julie Kemp, her husband Andy, and their 8-year-old son Landon were driving home from church when an ambulance returning to its station collided with their vehicle in an intersection. Andy died immediately. But it was after his second death in the hospital that something phenomenal took place. At just 8 years old, Landon experienced something that would defy explanation. The physicians had already forewarned Julie of the worst when they reached the hospital. They told her that even if her son survived, he would be in a vegetative state and would not be able to communicate, ambulate, or even feed himself. Of course, all the odds were against him. At Andy's funeral, Julie was heartbroken, still reeling from the tragedy of her husband's death. Her grief turned to anger as unanswerable questions battered down her soul. Why didn't God step in and defend us? Why did this have to happen? For the first time in my life, my faith quivered. Tormented, Julie prayed passionately for God to save Landon's life. She did not abandon hope for 2 agonizing weeks while Landon lay in the coma, hooked up to life support machines. But after 2 excruciating weeks of comatose, Landon started opening his eyes to the amazement of everyone. He does not have any cerebral damage, but in the midst of the relief and joy, Julie knew she had to go through the heartbreaking task of telling Landon that his father died. Where most others would have given up, Julie stayed with him, praying day and night for a miracle. And then it happened, against all odds. Landon opened his eyes. The doctors were shocked. Not only had he survived, but he showed no signs of brain damage. For Julie, it was nothing short of miraculous, but the most challenging part lay ahead. She had to tell her son about his father's death. Recalling the moment, Julie said, "He still had facial lacerations, and his head was full of pain. I didn't want to add to his pain." Gaining her composure, Julie asked Landon in a meek manner if he knew where his father had gone. What Landon said next left her speechless. "I saw Dad in heaven," he said. "Well, when I was in my first operation, that's when I saw heaven." Then Landon launched into a vision so real, so minute that Julie could hardly believe her ears. He described his father standing serenely in a realm of indescribable beauty. What else will Landon say about the experience of having been in the afterlife? Wait and see. Landon's experience in heaven. At age 8 years, Landon Whitley had a near-death that was very remarkable to put his life in a fingerprint that was indelible. His life was really poised on a balance because one had a bit of consciousness. Sometimes it would wane. In this position, he had a vision that seemed to be heaven. Memories of that day remain so fresh in Landon's life and have continued for a lifetime. He remembers a place so different from this earth, consisting of an amazing view, tranquility, and an overpouring feeling of love and peace. The first thing that caught Landon's attention was the beautiful colors, which were so different from those he had seen on Earth. Everything looked brighter. He described the colors as if they were alive and giving out light. The colors of the heavenly landscape were much different than he had ever seen before. He made the atmospheric conditions calm and peaceful, which was in sharp contrast to the chaos that had filled the world beneath. No anguish, no sorrow, no fear touched this place. Rather, there was a sense of deep peace, a stilling calmness embracing him like warm arms. It was a place of unity and love, a divine bond that tied all around him. As Landon journeyed through this fantastical world, he encountered beings that utterly astonished him. He encountered angels, those beings of light and goodness, warm and comforting. They didn't say much, Landon said, but they smiled, and he knew the joy they felt in his presence. Their presence was reassuring, and they didn't need to speak their thoughts. Instinctively, Landon picked up on their intentions. Here to teach and guard, to make him feel comfortable, unafraid, as he'd experience in this new world. Besides these angelic beings, Landon was also reunited with his father, Andy, who had died in a vehicular accident. He shared, "Yes, I know where he is. I saw him in heaven. I saw my dad." He remembered that he was there, and he knew that it was him. His father didn't say much, but Landon felt his fatherly love. Landon had been too young to understand the concept of mortality when his father had left, but in this place of heaven, it all made much sense. The deep connection with Andy seemed as if they had never parted. His father brought comfort and reassurance to Landon, and for a moment, he stopped missing his father so much. Instead, he was flooded with the knowledge that they would never be apart. Perhaps the most amazing of all the things that happened to Landon in heaven was meeting two children whom he had never seen in his life, but instantly knew were his brother and sister. These were Julie. His mother had miscarried twice before Landon was born, but she had never told him about that. Even with this knowledge, Landon instinctively knew the kids were his siblings or sisters. "Did you know Cassie is your sister?" "No, I have 2 siblings. You experienced a miscarriage during pregnancy, didn't you?" "Who told you about the miscarriage during pregnancy?" "She told me." "What does she look like?" "Like Cassie, only a little smaller." He further said they were meek and mild, and he felt an instant connection with them. The siblings hugged, and at that moment, Landon knew that heaven was one place where family reunites and love knows no life or death bounds. Time seemed to stand still in heaven. Landon wasn't in a hurry about anything. He was just within this moment, an eternal moment of peace. "I wasn't thinking about anything," he said. It was as if time itself had just stopped. All the anxieties and weights of worldly life no longer applied. No pain from the accident, no fear of what was in store. just an overwhelming sense of love and acceptance. As Landon's time in heaven drew to a close, he found himself being returned to earth, although he wasn't particularly sure why. He remembers the moment he left heaven as bittersweet. "I didn't want to leave," he said, "but I knew I needed to come back. I had a family that needed me." With that understanding, Landon was whisked back to the hospital, where he was struggling for life following the terrible accident. That is not some passing hallucination of heaven for Landon. It was a really life-changing experience. It reassured him of life after death and gave him an inner peace that exists even at this time. "What I saw, what I experienced," he says, "was real. It was more real than anything I've ever known." On his final visit to paradise, Landon would meet Jesus, who had a message for the world. What was this message? Keep watching to find out. The message from Jesus. Landon says that his meeting with Jesus was quite unplanned on his part. He saw one who was radiant, powerful, and full of unconditional love, and it branded his inner being. God's eternal gift is, for God so loved humanity that he gave his unique Son. God loves humanity, and that includes you, and Jesus loves you. He loves you so much that he still carries the scars of his limitless love for you. Jesus, as Landon described him, was warm and loving. His eyes were deep with an understanding and kindness that immediately made Landon feel safe and loved in this strange place. In this holy moment, Jesus did not speak to Landon in the way that humans do on earth. Instead, he spoke directly to Landon's heart and mind, a language that requires no interpretation. Jesus had a specific message that he gave to the world through Landon, one wherein he let him know that his life was real, heaven is real, and that mankind must come back to him. Jesus reminded him that life is supposed to be full of love, faith, and a lot of adherence to the Word of God. This, though, wasn't a message just to be told to Landon, but was in itself an action. Jesus then took Landon back and ordered him to return to earth to tell them everything that he had seen and encountered, asking him to convey some things to them, specifically that Jesus is real. He loves them so much. Life on earth is a single piece of an extremely massive eternity puzzle. That being asked of an 8-year-old was a tall order. He was just aware of the gravity of his given task. Landon often referred to the experience as if he had been shown scenes from a movie, sufficient to understand the storyline without seeing every detail. Jesus didn't show him everything about heaven or the future, but he showed Landon enough to solidify his faith and give him a message of hope and purpose. Landon said that in heaven, you didn't learn things, you just knew them. He knew who the people were, why they were there, and how they were related to him. Nobody had to explain it. But when Landon returned to Earth for the 3rd time as a child, he brought this heavenly assignment along with him. It was hard for him to put into words the deep experiences he had gone through, but with years, he started to find the words to tell his story. Landon was convinced that he had been given a 2nd, or rather 3rd chance at life for a purpose, to spread the news about Jesus and to give hope to those who were lost, in sorrow or in desperation. Years later, Landon and his mom Julie began to share their testimony regularly through a ministry operation called Grief Share. It puts people who are going through loss together to share in a non-safe environment and support each other. For Julie, who had wrestled with anger and grief since her spouse's death in an accident, the program was a way to turn pain into purpose. For Landon, it was a way to fulfill the mission Jesus had given him. Landon's experiences with paradise gave him an unshakable faith. He spoke of angels, powerful and present, even at the darkest moments of the accident. She had once wondered why God had let all this tragedy befall her family, but she grew to feel certain that angels had been watching over them the whole time. Landon's survival and miraculous recovery, considering the extent of his injuries, metal plates in his head, a reconstructed nose, and the loss of vision in one eye, reinforced her belief in God's plan. While the physical scars of his ordeal remained in Landon's body, he lived a pretty normal life, but his view of life was anything but ordinary. Landon knew his time on earth was temporary and that his home was in paradise. That knowledge gave him a sense of serenity and purpose that few people his age could comprehend. Landon and Julie's journey also inspired Julie to write a book entitled Faith Has Its Reasons. She wrote in it how God had used their pain and suffering to point others toward himself. She shared the story of how Landon's story had affected so many lives, offering a ray of hope as people struggled with their own faith. Landon says the mission was pretty simple: to tell everybody Jesus is real, heaven's real, and every person has a purpose for living. And his experience of dying, what little he has learned or could see, was just an amazing, life-altering experience, not just for him, but for many other lives who got a chance to hear about him. Do you think that Landon has actually seen heaven through Jesus' words? What is your interpretation of the message given to him? Whatever your belief, his story is just the beginning of an extraordinary journey into the unknown. Now, meet Zach and Mia, whose powerful testimonies of encountering Jesus will leave you in awe of what lies beyond. Zach and Mia's testimonies of seeing Jesus Clemens was a high school football player when the sudden turn of events made his life take a complete volte-face and brought him face to face with Jesus. As a student, while attending physical education class, he suddenly collapsed in the field. His cardio system had stopped working, and clinically, he was dead for around 20 minutes. The doctors later said that he had suffered a full-blown cardiac arrest. His mother was taken to the scene, while Zach was airlifted to a pediatric medical facility. The amazing miracle was that just when the medical team was about to call his time of death, they found a pulse. After a few days, Zach came out of his coma, and his recovery has been nothing less than a miraculous turn. Zach gave personal testimony to dying, seeing Jesus, and coming back. In minute detail, he described what he remembered seeing and hearing while being starved of oxygen. Even in light of the severity of the accident, Zach's humor, resilience, and boldness to share God's message through testimony have helped see him through his experience. Other than Landon and Zach, little Mia has also experienced Jesus while she was unconscious in the physical realm. Melissa Harris shared that in October 2020, she and her husband Mike had a cabin getaway and went hiking with their children in Ohio's Wayne National Forest on their last day. Mike was carrying their daughter Mia down a path when tragedy struck. Melissa said she heard Mike let out a blood-curdling scream, Mia's baby, in a way that told her that something disastrous had happened. Melissa grabbed onto Mia and held her in her arms, believing her to be dead. A large tree branch had broken and fallen 60 feet to the ground, hitting Mia squarely on the head. Melissa said Mia didn't show any sign of vital functioning, and Mike prayed to God that she wake up. She lay like that for about a minute, and then let out a scream that sounded terrible, as though it came from the pit of her stomach. Melissa exclaimed that was the worst sound she had ever heard, but at the same time, it meant Mia was alive. Finally, the first responders arrived and whisked Mia away to a nearby medical facility. Mike followed in his car but pulled over to call his ecclesiastical staff to pray. He wanted them to intercede for his daughter, pleading with God to intervene miraculously. As Mike prayed, the words spread like wildfire through his ecclesiastical leadership at home and abroad. People around the world were praying for Mia, asking God to intervene and spare her life. She was induced into a coma and taken to Nationwide Children's Hospital. The doctors informed them that she had a traumatic encephalic injury, which included a fractured skull and hemorrhaging to and around the brain. The only remaining real question was, would Mia wake up the next morning? Doctors pulled Mia out of her coma to the wonder of all who were waiting around her bedside. She reached down, grabbed onto her diaper, and said, "I peed in my pull-up." This, to Mike, was a clear signal that Mia was still there and that God intended for her to heal. Although Mia also presented hemiparesis on the left side of her body, she overcame any deficits within 3 days. She had a follow-up craniotomy weeks later to close her cranial structure and tear in the dura mater of her brain. Miraculously, Mia regained complete cognitive function, and her personality was intact as well. Her recovery was nothing short of miraculous, as she was the same effervescent, hilarious, and spirited child she had always been. It was as if nothing had ever transpired with her. Months later, Mia would confess to her father that she had a dream about Jesus, who brought her back to life. They knew and believed that God had healed Mia and that his hand was upon her life. The gift of being able to nurture their daughter was one they were thankful for, knowing full well this was a work of God. Mia made a full recovery, and Mike and Melissa knew they had experienced the miraculous and were forever grateful. Can a single moment redefine faith? Mia's miracle inspires, but Bobby's story takes a darker turn you must hear. Bobby's story. For most of his life, Bobby showed very little interest in God or Jesus Christ. His mind was filled with self-pity and bitterness. It wasn't until March 23, 2020, that Bobby's life would take a completely different turn. He felt perfectly fine and comfortable when he was falling asleep. However, when he woke up, he was fighting to breathe, as if an invisible boxer was punching his chest. His police training kicked in, and Bobby rolled into the fetal position to try to get through the breathing difficulty. Bobby did not know that his wife had called emergency services for him, and paramedics, along with police officers, reached their house. One of the officers extended a hand and invited Bobby to rise. This was Bobby's last memory of his pre-hospital experience, as he recounted. Bobby's wife filled in the missing gaps, explaining that Bobby had become cyanotic, stiff, and unresponsive prior to the officer's arrival. He asked if he was supposed to provide both of their interpretations and his own impression. Bobby then related that a silent force had picked him up and subsequently floated in a formless blackness that excluded all sights and sounds. His wife reports that Bobby was carefully walked downstairs by the paramedic personnel who instructed him not to hold on to anything, although he was in a metaphysical world. Miraculously, Bobby remained coherent and spoke with his wife, telling her how tired he was and apologizing. Bobby's wife recounts that his eyes rolled back and he became unconscious. He was immediately placed into an ambulance where CPR was administered. Bobby's heart again stopped beating. This time, he was clinically dead for more than 40 minutes before being stabilized and taken to the nearest hospital due to the severity of his condition. When he arrived at the hospital, he was clinically dead. Eventually, Bobby would meet the first responders who resuscitated him and be told that he had arrived at the medical facility clinically dead. But by then, the state of New Jersey had gone into lockdown, and Bobby's wife was not allowed to be at her husband's bedside in the hospital. Yet she saw him regularly and prayed fervently that he survived the virus. She once even laid her head to his face and whispered in his ear, "You absolutely dare not die," telling him emphatically that she was way too young to be called a widow. She got him up and asked him to get back to life, as he owed it to herself to do so. Irrespective of her trying to get him back on his feet, Bobby's condition deteriorated and he passed out once again. The medical staff informed Bobby's wife that she should get ready to say goodbye, as they were not so sure about his survival chances. Their spiritual mentor came and told her to speak life into him instead of listening to the nurses. With a firm decision, Bobby's wife went into his hospital room, praying and praying loudly. Her prayer attracted the medical staff to the same hospital, and before long, a miracle opportunity appeared in the intensive care unit. Bobby was rushed to the ICU, and before she could bid farewell, he was whisked away. According to her, all that happened because of my prayers and faith. While this was going on in the physical world, Bobby was describing a very different experience that was taking place in the spiritual realm. He found himself floating in some sort of inky blackness, unable to see or hear anything. Then, a figure began to take shape from his right side, and Bobby was astonished to find it was Jesus Christ. Smitten with grief, he started to apologize profusely. Convinced of Jesus' reality, the divine being floated around Bobby's feet before approaching him and wrapping him in a gentle, wedding-like embrace. Bobby Sosa describes a profound experience in the spiritual world in which he saw a tall, olive-skinned man with deep-set eyes and hair locks reaching his shoulders. This being enfolded Bobby tenderly and spoke wordlessly yet deeply. Bobby felt a great sense of rapport, knowing that he would be okay. The figure vanished into the darkness, and Bobby was left floating like a spectre. He then met his friend Mark, a former police officer who had died. Mark had always been concerned about his wife in case something happened to him, and Bobby had promised to look after her. Now, in the spirit world, he could reassure Mark that he had kept his promise. Mark thanked him, and they embraced in such a way that it brought a conversation of experiences on Earth that they had shared. There was little said but profound regarding the life occurrences and not the deaths of one another. It was an ongoing friendship without any statement of mortality or the state they had found themselves in. 9 days later, with a fully grown beard, Bobby came back to life in the ICU, confused. He did not remember a thing about the events of the day he fell sick. The ICU was a busy place with doctors and patients hurrying up and down its corridors. He lay helpless, terrified, with nobody explaining to him what had happened to him. The first person he saw was an Asian man in full protective gear who greeted him as Robert but said nothing else. The instincts kicked in high gear, and he became defensive and refused any touching. He looked at his body and realized he could not even move his left leg while watching the COVID-19 television coverage, and wondered whether that was the cause of his condition. However, he later learned he had never contracted the virus despite multiple tests. He became paranoid. He felt that the medical staff wanted to harm him or steal his organs. He would not sleep or eat for fear of being poisoned. This condition lasted for 2.5 days, until one evening when a nurse was attending to him, and a black male in lime green scrubs came into the room. The man in lime green approached Bobby with an aspect of tenderness that Bobby had never witnessed in any of the hospital personnel. He reached his hand to touch Bobby's left wrist, and an immediate reaction made Bobby ask who he was. The man softly introduced himself, addressing Bobby as his son. Gentle were the words from this man that Bobby, inquiring again, asked him who he was. He said he was a prayer warrior sent by his wife, who prayed for him with their children behind the hospital each night. At first, Bobby was skeptical, but as this man spoke to him, he found some comfort. His wife mentioned the words prayer warrior before. Now, he was at peace as he had heard them again. 2 weeks passed, and Bobby finally regained coherence and awareness of his environment. He remembered that he died 5 times that day, and related the whole experience to his wife, who was dumbfounded by the story. The experience changed Bobby. He used to be aggressive. He always kept himself busy. It also showed Bobby that we only had 2 inborn fears: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. All the rest is what is instilled in us due to our experiences and what happens around us. And when we cross into the other side, pure love replaces this, wrapping us in a blanket to console us. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notifications bell so as to be notified anytime we post. See you in the next video.